So in 2020, Microsoft, ultimately at the end of the day, what they're gonna do is they're gonna have more. They're gonna drive more revenue, they're gonna get more use, they're gonna get more product adoption, and they're gonna get more use of things like Azure. At the end of the day though, it's really important to remember that it's not about the revenue, and I know I mentioned it, it's about the revenue, it's about the product adoption, but really in 2020, for enterprises specifically, it's trying to get more customers. Customer success stories, pictures with Satya standing with the CEO of Walmart, standing with the CEO of X company and talking about partnership in the retail space as well as manufacturing and other industries. Yeah, so with Office 365, it's an area that we talk about a lot, right? At the end of the day, the question was, well, who isn't using Office 365 yet? Surprisingly, there's actually companies that we work with that have actually yet to jump to Office 365. Now that's a small portion of their base that they're trying to go get, so I don't want to spend a lot of time on that, but that does exist. When I say more regarding Office 365, it really comes in a couple layers. The first is getting Office 365 E1 or E3, try to convert them to E5. E5 is effectively the more robust Office 365 profile. When I say more, I'm also talking about the first line worker community. Okay, so Microsoft has done a great job getting corporate users. Their legacy, they are long-standing customers. They converted Office on-premise to Office 365. There's a whole base of employees that are now starting to get digital tools for the first time. You talk about these workplace initiatives, that user community is an opportunity for them to get not only Office 365 F1, but also to try to elevate the use and the collaboration amongst those user communities. Yeah, so use. Now, if you think about Microsoft, right? They're one of the largest companies in the world. Obviously, revenue matters because they're publicly traded, and I mentioned a minute ago, they're gonna continue to accelerate and achieve and beat revenue growth numbers. I have no doubt in my mind, they have many different pillars to be able to do that. When it comes to the enterprise market, you know, use is very important to them, and it's something that they maybe haven't had to spend as much time standing behind and promoting, essentially around teams. Okay, so for instance, if you are a football fan, or perhaps even if you're not, you probably heard that last weekend they actually put commercials about teams out there. So why are they spending money on this? It's because there are alternatives that are grabbing market share from them around collaboration. Slack, Google Hangouts, Workplace by Facebook, Zoom. These are very real competitors that have been chipping away at their market share. Now, they've always been able to rely on Office 365 comes with Teams, so they just believed, for lack of a better term, it would just naturally lead to use of Teams. They're gonna shut down Skype in a year, they're gonna push people there. That was the theory. But what's in practice is that there's a lot of organizations that are actually making the decision to, yes, understand Teams is available, but Zoom and Slack, they're winning business. The other thing that's going on that they need to protect against, and it all ties to use, is these rivals, these alternatives are now getting bold, and they're coming out with public statements. They're coming out saying, hey Microsoft, it's great that you're reporting Teams use, but isn't that just part of a bundle? Are they actually using it? Are they actually being productive? Because I have the same customers you do. So why don't you tell me about that usage number? And they've never been able to. And so for Microsoft, this is the area where they're gonna compete. They need to get to a place where that number can be solidified around actual usage. And lastly, here's the thing, it's still cloud, right? So use is the most important thing, because at the end of the day, if users are using and are productive on your cloud solution, which you do not own, there comes a point where you could be the best negotiator, you could have it all planned out, but the business has to make a decision of, are we really gonna rip this out and tell all of our users? And when you think about enterprise, 10,000, 50,000, 100,000 user communities that we work with, are you really gonna suggest that they're gonna rip that out and go to a different solution? That is very likely not gonna happen. So again, use in 2020, in a lot of ways, is gonna be more important than the revenue tied to the use. Yeah, so in 2020, again, it's going to come down to a few things for them that I've already talked about. Getting more use of Office 365. I talked about Azure, which is a key component. But here's a couple that I'd keep an eye on. LinkedIn, number one. Okay, so they made a significant acquisition not that long ago. And the market's been watching and paying attention and starting to ask questions about, well, what about the revenue that's coming from that? And it's all, at the end of the day, they said, well, look, you know how much data we got? You know how much data we got from LinkedIn? And don't worry about it. We're going to use that data to elevate our Dynamics solution, right? So think about it, tethering it to Dynamics 365, the data pull in from that. We're going to work on selling that. But here's what's happening now. We've been starting to see this, I'd say, over the last 6 months. LinkedIn, one, you can now procure as part of your EA renewal. So they're actually allowing you to move LinkedIn as a strategic offering under EA negotiations. Why would they do that? Well, it makes it easier to purchase. So you make it easier, you remove friction, it elevates the opportunity. The other thing is this, they're going aggressively to that same community and they're saying, hey, look, we talk Dynamics 365, we're your partner of choice, Office 365, we're a partner of choice. What are you doing about recruiting, right? What are you doing about that? Because we have LinkedIn, right? So I know, and by the way, I can look this up, you have employees that are using our free version for a little bit more extra dollars, which by the way, you can roll into your EA. Wouldn't you like to unlock all the possibilities of LinkedIn? And when I say unlock, it's the tool itself, the functionality, which is the leader, but it's also the data behind it. So therefore, you're going to get the data in the solution LinkedIn, tethering it to whether you're Dynamics or not is obviously additional value. The other core product, and I can't stress this enough, Power BI. Okay, so Salesforce, which is another vendor that I cover, they acquired Tableau for a reason, right? It goes back to data. It goes about making data valuable, the visualization of data. That's a competitive landscape. Microsoft needs to keep Salesforce Tableau out. They need to find more revenue streams that ties back to that data, and they're aggressively pushing Power BI. Now, I will tell you that in 2020, there's a lot of internal objectives, from at least from what I've seen, to get adoption, even at a small, I'll call it use case level, right? Maybe not all in. That in and of itself grows leverage. So when I see that, that leads me to believe that they want more and they're on a cycle. Because again, Microsoft has the ability to not have to take it all day one because they know they'll get it all later. So Power BI, and you think about that tool on top of data, and as you pump data into your system, which all these enterprises and small businesses, they're going to be focused on it, that solution, if they are the solution of choice, not only will it drive use, which I talked about before, but the revenue applications of that and the ability to keep out is astronomical. So Azure, I mentioned that a minute ago. So at the end of the day, here's the deal, okay? If you want to talk market and you want to talk who's going to win, AWS is going to be number one. They'll be that for some time. There's a lot of reasons why. One, their focus area, right? They sell to cloud vendors. They sell to gaming communities. They sell to things like Uber, and they sell to, they're in that space. But in the enterprise space, I absolutely expect the gap to close. We're already seeing it, right? Microsoft was smart. Again, I mentioned to go get a taste of Power BI, get a taste of Teams, elevate use, get sticky, drive revenue. It's the same thing with Azure. It's a meter-based solution, right? So they want to get workloads on it. They want to get adoption at a small level. The Azure monetary commit, it's like a calling card. But what's happening is more organizations that we're working with are now putting more on it. And what's happening is what Amy Hood herself, the CFO, has called the flywheel effect. So once it starts, and you don't know how many meetings I sit down with, whether it's the chief information, CISO, or whether it's a CIO or an architect or head of digital architecture, they all say the same thing. Adam, once this starts, it's very hard for it to stop. Now, we may go multi-cloud. We may give Google a chance, we may give AWS a chance, and that's all well and good. But once the thing starts, it's going to grow. And Microsoft knows this. So in 2020, that gap, it's going to close. It's going to close because they're going to rely on those relationships. It's going to close because their revenue growth across many different ways, unlike AWS, is going to grow. It's going to grow because retail, AWS cannot penetrate. They're going to continue to grow because as retailers and CPG as they need that data and they start putting more into the analytical side of Azure, the more that goes in, the more revenue is going to go up. That alone is going to drive it. And then there's the contract that they are going to sign, even though there's a lot of competitive battle over this, the Jedi contract. AWS, it's the reason why they're trying to put an injunctive a petition in there. It's why Oracle's been fighting over this. Sure, this political means Bezos doesn't like Trump and there's all that stuff. But at the end of the day, if they win, which they did, let's be clear here, they did. But when it gets solidified, the sheer volume that's going to come with that is also going to allow economies of scale, which are going to be put into their market, which is going to allow them to grow Azure, which is going to shrink their growth. But one thing that's also important, I know the questions around Azure, but Google, okay? Google's got a stake in this too. And what I'm seeing is they're getting a lot more opportunities as well, getting head-to-head AWS and Azure. So I actually believe the gap between Microsoft and number 3 Google is also going to shrink, which is going to put more pressure on Microsoft, which behaviorally is going to mean that Microsoft's going to be that much more aggressive to their base to get more use. So if you have a renewal in 2020, hopefully you've already started preparing for your renewal. Now you may be saying, hey, mine's at the end of 2020, so I got plenty of time. Well, good for you, but you really don't. And what I mean by that is if you want to do it right. So if some of the things I was talking about today are things that are on your radar, like maybe you want to consider a competitive alternative. So maybe you're thinking about Power BI, but Tableau or Salesforce, which most likely is also one of your vendors, you need to give yourself the time to go through that process. LinkedIn. Well, there's a lot of internal work that's going to have to happen to move from we're using LinkedIn to a $500 million investment in LinkedIn. Maybe you're thinking about Office 365 for your first line workers, but hey, there's this company Google trying to penetrate here. We need to allow ourselves time if Google could be a viable alternative for them. So where I'm going with this, in 2020, if you have a renewal, you have a lot of opportunity for yourself to improve your current relationship. Yep, you can actually improve your current relationship. We're doing it now, but you gotta give yourself time, okay? If you're gonna sit here and say, well, 3 months feels right, you're wrong. Can you do it? Sure, but you better get even more help than you're gonna need anyways. The other thing I would tell you is that Microsoft is not thinking about their renewals in 2020. To the same degree you're thinking about yours. They have a lot of renewals in 2020 and they're already planning for their 2021s. And so if you think about how you prepare for your opponent across the table, just remember one thing. They're preparing more than you are right now. And they have a machine behind them and they have contacts within your business to penetrate and get what they want. So maybe you could rush, but you probably can't. And so you need to really start to think about a couple things. One, do I know how good my current relationship is? I don't mean they bring donuts in on a quarterly basis and everyone has a nice dinner at the end of the day. I mean, how competitive has your contract been? How good is your pricing across all your products? Do you have the right protections in place? Do you have the right investments? Do you have the right points of contact? You need to start assessing that now. You also then have to understand what actually matters. And I said some things today, Power BI and LinkedIn. Hopefully you took notes or you can play this back, the beauty of video, right? But here's the thing. That's not enough. There's a whole host, and I could go on and on about other things that matter to what degree and how you stagecraft that with Microsoft. And lastly, there are a lot of companies that have sat around for years with air cover from above that they didn't actually have to really achieve improvements or negotiate improvements with Microsoft. That day, that air cover is going away. And so now you are going to be more susceptible, more accountable for end success because there's companies like ours and other people talking about all this leverage that's out there. So you better do it right. You better do it right for that reason and this other reason, which is, when's the next time you're going to get a chance to do it right? 3 years from now. And I don't know about you, but waiting 3 more years to get it right is not a good business decision, and it's definitely not a good career decision.